Hey everybody, this is Tracy here with another edition of A View from Tracy's Point, and we are here with part 2 of Demetrius Smith's testimony. In the previous video, part 1, we had the associate attorney. I think I was calling her the assistant before, but she was actually an associate attorney at Susan Logan's law firm, and that was like a wrap up from Geronda Pace's testimony, which I'm also going to bring to you guys in another video. And then we had the Cook County clerk, who was not the Cook County clerk or employee that dealt with the whole Aaliyah situation, but we did have testimony from her. And then we had the beginnings of the saga leading up to Demetrius Smith actually taking the stand to give his testimony. And so here in part 2, we are picking up where Demetrius has been called by the prosecutors to begin his testimony. And so for those of you, if this is the first video that you're watching where I am reading the transcripts, I will give the name of the person who's talking, which is typically the prosecutor for the Eastern District of New York, and she will be asking questions of the witness. The witness in this instance is Demetrius Smith, and then he is going to respond to the question. And I'm just going to keep going back and forth without saying who it is. Like, you know, the prosecutor said this, Demetrius said this. I'm just going to read through what they said, and then if the because the prosecutor is asking questions, he is answering the questions. But if we get into a situation where he begins to ask questions, then I will notify you that it's Demetrius that's asking the question. And that's just to keep this moving, because these documents are hundreds of pages long. And so this document in particular is 293 pages. And I have already read about 100 and probably 50 pages was in the first document. And so now I am going to read the rest of the document. And so we're going to pick up with Demetrius has been called, you know, he's been introduced or called to the stand by the prosecutor, Cruz Melendez. And so then Judge Dunley intervenes, and she's saying, I'm just going to give you a couple of directions before the testimony starts. The first thing is our court reporter takes down everything that you say. So it's important first that you speak into the microphone so she can hear you. And second, that you not speak too quickly. And the third part is that you don't speak over whoever is questioning you. It just makes hard for them to do their job. The next thing is, if there is a question that isn't clear or you want to have repeated, just let me know. And finally, do your best to just answer the question that you are being asked. Okay? And then Demetrius says, yes, ma'am. And then Dunley says, great, go ahead. And so the direct examination of Demetrius Smith by Miss Cruz Melendez begins. And so she says, good afternoon, Mr. Smith. Did you receive a subpoena to appear here today? Yes, I did. You don't want to be here testifying, do you? No, I'd rather not. Have you also received a grant of immunity for your testimony today? Yes. What do you understand that to mean? That I won't be prosecuted for anything that I say. Now, do you also understand that that grant of immunity does not extend to perjury? Yes. Or giving a false statement? Do you understand that? Yes. Or obstruction of justice? Do you understand that? Yes. or otherwise failing to comply with the immunity order issued. Do you understand that? Yes. Mr. Smith, how old are you? 65. Where did you grow up? In Chicago, Illinois. Are you employed? At the present, no. And what did you do before your unemployment status? I worked as a limousine driver and then COVID hit. I worked as a limousine driver and the COVID hit. Since then, I have been unemployed. Donnelly, just do your best to use that microphone. It's a big room. Demetrius, yes, ma'am. Donnelly, that's great. Go ahead. And then Cruz Melendez picks up. She says, do you have any nicknames? My family calls me Johnny. I'm showing the witness what has been marked for identification purposes as Government Exhibit 6. Do you see Government Exhibit 6 for identification purposes there? Do you see that there on the monitor? Yes, I do. Do you recognize the individual in that photograph? Yes. If the defense has no objection, the government moves to admit Government Exhibit 6 into evidence. Mr. Canick, no objection. Donnelly, all right. That will be in evidence. Government's Exhibit 6 received in evidence. Demetrius Smith, you can publish it. Exhibit published. I don't know why he said you can publish it, but anyway. Cruz Melendez, are you familiar with an individual named Robert Kelly, also known as R. Kelly? Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, I need to back up for a moment. Who is the individual in this photograph? That's me, Melendez Cruz. I moved too soon. So back to my other question. Are you familiar with an individual named Robert Kelly, also known as R. Kelly? Yes, I am. Have you met Robert Kelly in person? Yes, I have. I'm showing you what is in evidence as Government Exhibit 1. Do you recognize the individual in this photograph? It looks like Robert. When you say Robert, do you mean Robert Kelly? Yes. Do you see Robert Kelly in the courtroom here today? Take your mask off. Now that's what Demetrius said. I guess he was telling Rob, take your mask off so I can see you. And so then Melendez Cruz says, if you see him, can you please point him out? That's Robert. And indicate an item of clothing he is wearing. He's wearing a gray suit with a brown shirt. Donnelly, indicating the defendant. And then Cruz Melendez. Mr. Smith, approximately when did you first meet the defendant? I met Robert Kelly in 84. And how did you meet the defendant? I met him at a talent show at Kenwood Academy. And what's Kenwood Academy? It was a park district function, and Kenwood Academy is a high school. Now, when you met the defendant, were you in the entertainment business? Yes. What did you do in the entertainment business? I was a singer. I had a band. After meeting the defendant, what, if any, relationship did you have with him? When I met Robert, he was performing. He was a youngster. He was singing original songs, and at that time, I was looking for songs, and Robert totally impressed me, and I approached him for it, and from that moment, we began working together. And in that capacity, did you start working for the defendant? Well, I just assisted him with anything he needed to further his career. And approximately when did you begin working with him? 1984. Over that total period of time, did you work with the defendant? I worked with Robert from 84 to 96. I think is when we ended. 94 we ended. I went back again, pretty much 96 it all ended. Would it be fair to say that you took some breaks from your employment with the defendant? A couple, yes. Now, during periods of these breaks that you mentioned, did you maintain contact with the defendant? We ran back into each other as far as me calling him on a regular basis in the beginning. No, we got separated again. You know, I went to prison at one time. Now, you had mentioned that you had almost immediately began working for the defendant. What was your title? How would you describe yourself? Well, in the beginning, I would say I just wanted to be somebody that he could look up to, that could help, but as time developed, I was like a personal assistant to him. And then Melendez Cruz. And what were your responsibilities as his personal assistant? Again, just seeing to it that he got things that he needed to further his career. I just wanted him to be comfortable to write. What, if any, responsibilities did you have with respect to the defendant's schedule? When we signed with the record label, they gave me tours to do, so I would do the scheduling. Yeah, I pretty much everything. Did you have any responsibilities with respect to travel? I did scheduling. Scheduling included traveling. If he needed something to get something to his family or something, I would do that, Now, were you paid when you were the defendant's personal assistant? Well, in the beginning, there was no money, and as time went on, I was paid. And how were you paid as time went on? I was paid in check. Prior to being paid in check, did you have what was the agreement in terms of how much you would be paid? In the beginning, me and Robert, we've always discussed 5%. That was with me, him, and a former manager, Chuck Smith, and we discussed 5%. And pretty much Robert, in the beginning, we would make money in the subways. He'll make his money. He'll give me 5%, which was a little bit. Now, when you were working for the defendant, did you have an opportunity to meet people in the defendant's inner circle? Yes, I did. Who did you meet? I met his buddies. And who were they? They had, and then Canick interjects and says, Your Honor, I'm going to object to relevance. And then Donnelly, as usual, overruled. And then Cruz Melendez continued. You can answer, well, I met his buddies. I met his family. I met his brother. I met his, brothers. I met his sisters, his mom, his buddy, Larry, Torrey. Do you mean Larry's last name? Larry? We don't, if I may say, sir, if I may ask. Donnelly, oh, you want to speak to your counsel? Yes. Donnelly again, okay, the witness consults with his counsel. Then he comes back and he answers, yeah, I know Larry Hood. And then Cruz Melendez, and what other names do you recall of people you met while working with the defendant? Tory Diggs, Jim Pratt's, neighborhood friends, Are you familiar with an individual named Bruce Kelly? That's his brother. When you say his, who do you mean? That's Robert's brother. And are you familiar with an individual named Tyree Jamerson? Tyree Jamerson? Yes, I know Tyree. And what, if any, job or responsibility did Tyree Jamerson have with the defendant? Tyree was hired as, then Canick interjects, objection, and then Demetrius says security for Robert, and then Donnelly overruled. I want to make sure your microphone is on. We're having a little trouble hearing, and you can take your mask off too. Sorry about that. Go ahead, Miss Cruz Melendez. You had mentioned that you originally met the defendant at a talent show. At some point, did the defendant begin singing professionally? Yes. And was the defendant signed to a record label? Yes. And which record label was the defendant signed to? Signed to Jive Records. And approximately when was he signed to Jive Records? Oh, about 89, 88, something like that maybe. Now, as part of the defendant work with the record labels, did the defendant release any songs? Yes, he did. And when you were working with the defendant, did the defendant release any albums under Jive Records? Can you repeat that? Did the defendant release any albums under Jive Records? Yes. And what was the name of the defendant's first album? Born into the 90s. Generally speaking, who wrote the songs released by the defendant? Robert Kelly. And after releasing the Born into the 90s album, did the defendant release any other albums? Yes, he did. Now, at the time the defendant was signed with Jive Records, did he have a manager? Yes, he did. And what was his manager's name? Barry Hankerson. After signing with Jive Records, did the defendant ever perform live? Yes. And did people come to see his performances? Yes, they did. Now, you testified earlier that you first began working as the defendant's personal assistant, and then at some point you were also assisting with tours. Is that correct? Yes, I worked as a tour manager as well. And approximately when did you become his tour manager? Our first tour. And do you recall when that first tour was? The Born Into the 90s album. Do you remember an approximate date? Well, not off the top of my head. Let me see. Born Into the 90s we did. We did shows way before that. We did shows with Heavy D and the Boys. This was before his deal. So, signed with Jive. We got Born Into the 90s, came out. So, I would say 1990, in the vicinity of that time frame. In the vicinity, yeah. So, as his tour manager, what were your responsibilities? To get him to and from the tour and on stage on time, safe. And at the same time, make sure everything was accommodated. His payroll. I took care of the artists. I took care of the crew. My responsibility was a lot. Now, you mentioned that you assisted with the tour responsibilities. Did the defendant ever perform live outside of Illinois? Yes. And did you travel on tour with the defendant? Yes. What locations do you recall traveling to with the defendant on tour? Well, we did. We had tours all over down south. We had tours all over the United States. We went overseas. We did a lot of tours. We covered a lot of ground. Are you familiar with an individual named Javante? Yeah, I remember Javante. And did Javante ever travel on tour with you and the defendant? Well, one time I remember, yes. And what, if any, role did Javante have with respect to the defendant's tour? Well, she didn't have a role. They were just like little singers. They were singers, and he wanted them to see what it was like on the road and watch the other acts that were out there as well. So you testified that you traveled on tour with the defendant outside of Illinois around the country. Yes. Did people come to see the defendant perform when he performed outside of Illinois on tour? Yes. And when the defendant performed live at shows, did any other musicians perform in any of those shows? Yes. Earlier, you also testified that the defendant generally wrote his songs. Did the defendant ever write or produce any songs for other musical artists? Yes, he did. And did the defendant ever collaborate on music projects with any other artists? Yes, he did. Are you familiar with the individual named Aaliyah Holton? Yes, I'm familiar with Aaliyah. Did you ever meet Aaliyah Holton in person? Yes, I did. I'm showing just the witness what's been marked for identification purposes as Government's Exhibit 54. Mr. Smith, do you recognize the individual in this photograph? Yes. And do you recognize it to be Aaliyah? Your Honor, is there no objection from the defense? The government moves to admit Government Exhibits 54, and then Canick says, no objection, Your Honor. And then the judge says, all right, then it is in evidence and that they can publish it. And publish it means that they are showing the juror the information. And the courtroom, whoever's in the courtroom can see it as well. Then Cruz Melendez continues and she says, is Aaliyah still living? No, she's not. How did you come to meet Aaliyah? I met Aaliyah through her uncle, Barry Hankerson. And what, if any, relation, again, did Barry Hankerson have with the defendant? Barry was Robert's manager. And do you recall approximately when you first met Aaliyah? Yes. When was that? We went to Detroit to meet Aaliyah and her family. Do you remember approximately what date that was? No, I don't remember. If I showed you, is there something that might refresh your recollection? May I approach, Your Honor? Donnelly, yes. Okay, so fall of 92, that's about right. So this refreshes your recollection. Maybe, yeah, I'm not sure if I was precise, but it's around that time. Dunley, did you say the fall of 1992? Yes, ma'am. Okay, go ahead. Could have been around that time, could have been a little later, Dunley, okay. Cruz Melendez, and I think you mentioned that you met the defendant, that you met Aaliyah in Detroit. Who, if anyone else, was with you? Oh, I think the first time was me and Robert. And okay, and when we're talking about Detroit, we're talking about Detroit, Michigan. And is that where Aaliyah lived? Yes. And who, if anyone else, did Aaliyah live with in Detroit? I met her. She was with her dad, her mom, and her brother. Do you recall her brother's name? Rashad. Do you recall her parents' names? Michael and Diane. At the time that you and the defendant met Aaliyah in Detroit, did you also meet her brother at that time? Yes. And I'm sorry if you answered this already, but what was her brother's name? Rashad. And approximately how old was her brother at the time that you first met him? If I said how old he was, I would be assuming, so you currently don't recall. I don't recall his exact, how old he was actually. Is there something that might refresh your recollection? If I said it even before, maybe 15 or 14, something like that. Okay, so you think that's an assumption of his age. No one ever told me his age. Okay. But he appeared to you to be about 15 or 16. He appeared to be a young teenager. Now, was Rashad older or younger than Aaliyah? I think Rashad was older than Aaliyah. Canick, I'm going to object. If he knows, he knows. If he doesn't, then he's speculating. Dunley, he can say he thinks. What made you think that? Well, he was a big boy, taller, I never really knew their birthdays or nothing like that. Dunley, okay, so you're not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure. All right, I think Rashad was older. Then Cruz Melendez continues with her questioning. Do you recall how old Aaliyah was at that time? I think at that time, Barry told me she was. Canick, objection to what he was told. Donnelly, overruled. Demetrius, Your Honor, can my attorney sit here? Donnelly, if it makes you more comfortable, let's just do it 2 seats apart if that's okay. It's okay. And then the attorney interjects and she says, it's fine with me. Donnelly, okay. Then Cruz Melendez, Your Honor, I just want to make sure that the jury can see Mr. Smith. Donnelly, can everybody see the witness? The jury collectively, yes. And then Marcus, who's his attorney, would you prefer I sit here? And then the jury collectively, that's fine. And then Ms. Marcus says, okay. Then Donnelly, so what was the last question? I'm sorry, do you mind reading it back? Thanks. And then the record is read and Cruz Melendez continues her her direct examination. And she says, so you can answer, how old do you think Aaliyah was? I think at the time she was maybe 14, 15. I remember they told me that she did she had won some kind of TV show, American Got Talent, something like that. Back in the day, she was 13, 14, yeah. Now, child, y'all know America Got Talent was not out back in 1994. Oh, child. Anyway, so Melendez Cruz, where were you and the defendant when you met Aaliyah? We were at her house with her mom and dad. And why were you and the defendant in Detroit? Barry wanted us to. He wanted Robert to meet Aaliyah because she had talent. And he wanted to see if Robert thought she had something. And where had the two of you and the defendant, where had you traveled from? Chicago. And did you travel together to go to Detroit? Yes. How did you get there? I think we drove. I know if we got there, we drove. So from Detroit, Chicago, yeah, we drove. Can you explain to the jury what happened when you and the defendant first met Aaliyah? Canick objects. I'm going to object, Your Honor. Donnelly, again, I can't hear you. Canick, it's on. Donnelly, I know, but I guess I'm getting old. Canick, well, join the club. Your Honor, I'm going to object to form. Donnelly, okay, the objection is overruled. Go ahead. And then Cruz Melendez continues. Mr. Smith, can you please explain to the jury what happened when you and the defendant first met Aaliyah? When we first met Aaliyah, first of all, her mom and her dad, they were just special. It was like walking into the Cosby house, Bill Cosby and Felicia Rashad. And that's, how the family greeted us. And then Donnelly, you have to speak into the microphone. That's how, and then Demetrius replies, that's how the family greeted us. It was open. It was warm. It was just a good place to be at the time. And Robert and Leah was kind of shy when he asked her to sing. So Robert went to the piano and he'll play something and that relaxed everybody. And he'll have Aaliyah do something very simple and it brought her voice out. And, we started hearing some angelic stuff out of her and it was like a special time. So Aaliyah sang, yes, she did. For you and the defendant, yes. And what, if anything, did the defendant say about Aaliyah singing after Aaliyah sang for you and the defendant? Thought she had something special. Barry asked him, what do you think? And he thought she had something special. So during your trip to Detroit with the defendant, did you and the defendant spend any additional time with members of Aaliyah's family? Well, we went to play basketball with Rashad. We played with her uncle, Jomo Hankerson. We played with Tommy Turns and, we went out and had fun, And how long were you and the defendant in Detroit for that trip? Maybe a day or two. Now, you testified that Barry Hankerson had wanted the defendant to hear Aaliyah sing. Yes. At some point, did the defendant begin working with Aaliyah on her music? Later. And once he began working with Aaliyah, the defendant began working with Aaliyah on her music. What, if anything, did the defendant do with Aaliyah with respect to her music? He wrote her songs. Did Aaliyah put out any albums? Yes, she did. And who wrote that album? Robert Kelly wrote her first album. And what was the name of the first album? Age Ain't Nothing But a Number. Did Aaliyah ever travel to Chicago to work in the studio with the defendant? Yes, she did, with her parents. Now, when Aaliyah came to Chicago to record in the studio, which studio did she and the defendant use to record the music? As I remember, it was CRC Studios downtown, Ohio Street. And did you and the defendant ever travel back to Detroit to visit Aaliyah? Well, we went back to Detroit several times. We did visit Aaliyah's house, and we had other musicians in Detroit that Robert worked a lot with. And so we had other purpose in Detroit other than Aaliyah. Did Aaliyah and the defendant ever socialize outside of the studio? Canick, objection. Donnelly, overruled. Did they socialize outside of the studio? Yes, we all socialized. We went out, had ice cream, went to movies, including Aaliyah and the defendant. Whatever Robert did with Aaliyah was all about the music. If Robert wanted to be alone with Aaliyah in the other room in the studio, it was over vocals and stuff like that. I would just say if Robert took Aaliyah out by herself, I couldn't say she did that. No, didn't see that. No. But leave her alone in a room while, or if Robert was in the studio doing something and Leah was uncomfortable, he would clear the studio and he would be, there with her. If he wanted to go eat with her, I would take them to eat. If he wanted to spend time, it was all about her music. So, sir, you just testified that at times defendant might clear the room when he was with Aaliyah. Is that correct? Well, the studio, not just clear a room to just him and her. It's like if Aaliyah's not bringing out a note, he might say, turn the lights down in there. And he'll be on one side and she'll be on the other side, or he'll go in and talk to her, stuff like that, Sir, is your testimony here today that the defendant did not spend time alone with Aaliyah? No, now I'm not saying that. Okay, so did the defendant spend time alone on occasion? Yes. With Aaliyah? Yes. What did the defendant say to you about needing to be alone with Aaliyah? Donnelly, Mr. Smith, please have pity on our court reporter. She can't hear what you're saying. Well, speaking to the microphone, Donnelly, do you need to have your recollection refreshed? And then Demetrius said yes. And then Cruz Melendez, Your Honor, may I approach? And then Donnelly said yes. And then Demetrius said yes for some damn reason. I don't know. So then Melendez Cruz says, so what, if anything, did the defendant say to you about needing to spend time alone with Aaliyah? To work on her vocals, as it says in there that he would say he need to spend time with her to work on her vocals. In other words, I'm always under him, so go get you something to eat. In a private setting, is that correct? A private setting is a studio. Wherever we are, it's a studio, yeah. But alone, correct? Yeah. Then Canick, objection, Your Honor. And then, of course, Donnelly overruled. Cruz Melendez, to your knowledge, were there times when the defendant and Aaliyah ended up being alone in the defendant's apartment? Well, yes, I could. I would think so, yes. And how long might they spend time alone in his apartment? I mean, her mom would be, would come up with her and they'd all sleep, all stay over. And if her mom left out, Robert would be there with her and stuff like that. Sir, my question is, I'm just trying to see where you're trying to drive me with your question. Donnelly, so here is the deal. You listen to the question that Miss Cruz Melendez is asking you and then answer the question. Remember that instruction I gave you at the beginning to answer the question that you are being asked. What is the question that you're asking? And then Cruz Melendez, I asked how long might they spend at his apartment? Donnelly, do you know how long that? And then Cruz Melendez cut her off. The defendant and Aaliyah, when they were alone, how long might they spend at his apartment? Donnelly, that's the question. She says that's the question. A, did they spend time alone at Mr. Kelly's apartment? And then Demetrius, yes. Donnelly, and when they did that, how long did that happen? How long were they alone together? Demetrius, maybe about an hour, sometimes 15 minutes, sometimes 10 minutes. I'll go back and forth sometimes. It's like I don't know what you're asking me. Donnelly, okay, again. Demetrius, yes. Donnelly, listen to the question. Demetrius, I listened to the question. Donnelly, and if you don't understand, Demetrius, I heard the question. I understand the question. Donnelly, okay. So remember, I also told you at the beginning, if you don't understand a question, and then Demetrius, I understand the question. Donnelly, you do, okay? Demetrius, yes. Donnelly, so do your best to answer it, all right? Demetrius, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And then Donnelly, thank you so much. Go ahead. And so then Cruz Melendez picks up with her questioning. And she says, I think you said you mentioned 15 minutes, 10 minutes, but you also said an hour, correct? Maybe an hour, yeah. Did you ever have any conversations with the defendant about his behavior with Aaliyah? Okay, now can you ask that again, please? Yes. Did you ever have any conversations, sir? Did you ever have any conversations with the defendant about his behavior with Aaliyah? Well, I've asked Robert at times. I thought that, they were, playful. They played a lot. And I thought that at times I was concerned that that it was all playful. Yes. So at times I have asked him, Robert, everything cool with you and Aaliyah, man? Oh my God. So then, Cruz Melendez, and what did you mean by that when you asked the defendant if everything is cool there? I mean, I just thought, they were playful, just over playful and sometimes, sir. And I might have asked him every time, Robert, everything? You ain't messing with Aaliyah or nothing like that or something like that, yeah? And he'd say no. He said no, and I believed him. What, if anything, did you see or hear that made you ask the defendant about his behavior with Aaliyah? Being too playful, just being together and being too playful. That was just like, it was just being too playful, and Leah was young and I didn't want people to have the wrong vision of things. Did you raise your concerns with the defendant more than one time? A couple times, maybe. I just don't remember all of that, but maybe. Now, I remember that one time, and I remember a time I only remember one time actually right now. You had used the phrase, you asked the defendant whether or not he was, quote, messing with Aaliyah, end quote. What did you mean by messing with Aaliyah? Yes, I did ask him that before. I did ask him that. Okay, can you explain to the jury? This was a few years after. Well, what I meant by that was, I just thought they were too playful. I just thought that I didn't assume anything, and I don't want to assume anything now. I'm not asking you to assume anything, sir. I'm asking you, what I meant by that. And then Canick says, Your Honor, can he be allowed to answer? And then Donnelly, I think she needs to put the question. So let her finish the question and you let him finish the answer, and just listen to the question and answer it. Go ahead. So Cruz Melendez, I'm asking you, sir, what did you mean by the phrase messing with Aaliyah when you spoke to the defendant about his behavior with Aaliyah? Again, I thought they were kind of too friendly, and by being so friendly, I just wanted to make sure that Robert wasn't messing with Aaliyah. Messing with Aaliyah means flirting, being flirtatious, seducing her. Aaliyah. At some point, did you in fact learn that Aaliyah and the defendant were more than friends? Canick, objection. Donnelly, overruled. Ask that again. Did you learn that Aaliyah and the defendant were more than friends? They were more than friends from the very beginning. Aaliyah was a happy spirit, and at the same time, Robert seemed to be on the same page with Aaliyah in respect to their communication. They just had, and wait, ask again. I'll rephrase my question, sir. Was there a time when you learned that Aaliyah's and the defendant's relationship was more than professional or more than platonic? Well, yes, that was when boy, we were on tour and Robert mentioned to me that Aaliyah was in trouble, and we didn't explain anything until we got into the airport and got us home, and that was the only time. Okay, so I want to back you up for a moment. You mentioned that you were on tour. Were you outside of Chicago? Yes. Do you recall sitting here today what city you were in when you and the defendant were on tour? I think we were in Orlando, Is it fair to say you're not sure? Yes. And as part of this tour, did the defendant have a performance schedule? Yes. And what, if anything, did the defendant say to you prior to his going on stage? Aaliyah's in trouble, man. We need to get home. And did he tell you what he meant by Aaliyah was in trouble? No, not at the time, no. What, if anything, did you say in response to the defendant telling you that Aaliyah was in trouble? I asked. I wanted to call Barry Hankerson. I wanted to call her uncle and figure out what was going on. And what did the defendant say when? Then Demetrius cuts her off and goes, he said, don't call Barry. He said, it's deeper than you think, so I'll tell you about it. And I made the arrangements, and after the show, we boarded the plane to Chicago. Okay, and I just want to make sure that things are clear for the defendant. Clear for the jury. What was the defendant's demeanor when he said that Aaliyah was in trouble? His demeanor? Yes. He was about to go on stage. But when he told you that Aaliyah was in trouble, what was he like? What was his demeanor? He was concerned. And I think you mentioned you testified that you had suggested calling Barry Hankerson. Uh-huh. Can you just remind the jurors who Barry Hankerson was with respect to the defendant? Barry Hankerson was Robert Kelly's manager and Aaliyah's uncle. So you testified that at some point you made the arrangements, I believe. That's what you said. Yes. What arrangements did you make? I called our travel agent and she got us some flights to Chicago. Why did you call the travel agent? Because that's who arranged our flights. But who asked you to call the travel agent or to arrange flights? Well, Robert said we need to get home, so I called my travel agent. Okay, and did the defendant say when he wanted to leave to go back to Chicago? We had to leave after the show. And so, what arrangements did you make? I called my travel agent. Do you remember the travel agent's name at the time? I actually don't. So what kind of tickets did you arrange? Were they one-way round trip? I don't remember. So is there something that would refresh your recollection? Sure. So then Cruz Melendez, may I approach, Your Honor? Donnelly, yes. So then there's a pause and then Cruz Melendez continues. Does that refresh your recollection? Yeah, they were round trip. What kind of tickets? Yeah, it was round trip tickets. I'm sorry, I just want to ask the question. What kind of tickets did you arrange? Round trip tickets. And you said you contacted the travel agent. How did you contact the travel agent? Roll a letter. Donnelly, come on. Okay, I had to stop for a minute. So then Demetrius says, I used the telephone. And then Melendez Cruz. And who paid for the tickets? Who paid for the tickets? Yes, the company we were under, Black Round Records. And when you say the company in Black Round Records, Jive Records, whoever paid for his transit, I would submit the bill. They paid it. Who paid it directly? You didn't pay specifically for the tickets, though. Not out my pocket, no. Travel agent had hooked up with Jive Records or Black Round Records. Y'all, is it Black Round or is it Black Ground Records? Because they saying Black Round Records. Okay, so where was the defendant while you were making the travel arrangements? Performing. Now, you had testified earlier that the defendant was on tour at the time, and you also testified that he went on stage. With respect to this tour, was this day the last day of the tour? Well, I wouldn't think so, no, because they got round-trip tickets. So were there other performances scheduled after that day as part of the tour? Yes. Were you surprised by the defendant's request to leave the location of the show to go to Chicago? Yes. Canick. Objection. Donnelly, overruled. Can I see the parties at the side, please? And then, sidebar conference held on the record in the presence of the court and counsel out of the hearing of the jury. Donnelly, you've got to move this along. Just cut to the chase with him. You're not going to get every single detail out of him, and I would love to finish him today, but I suspect you have. Canick, I have some cross. Donnelly, a fair amount of cross with him, but the longer spend with him, the more difficult it is to get information out of him. Cruz Melendez, I do understand, Your Honor. I think he is testifying with respect to Racketeering Act 1. Donnelly, I know, I get it, but some of it is, let's go. I mean, I'm kind of telling you how to do your direct, but I would like to move it along a little bit, but I recognize he's a difficult guy. But if we can just move the ball a little bit forward to see as much as we can get done, he'll be back on you Monday. Canick, that's what I was going to tell you. Donnelly, but still, just try. I'm not going to yell and scream, but I'm Canic cuts her off and says, also note my objection. I don't know if I think it was not intended, but there were questions being asked where the question presupposes an answer and there was no connectivity. It's the kind of a situation where the witness had already gave that testimony. I think the question was just asked ahead of the foundational question to get that answer. Donnelly, I don't remember what it was. Canic, I don't remember now. Donnelly, it seemed like whatever it was, I remember the context, seemed like it wasn't an earth-shattering performance. Canic, right, it wasn't earth-shattering. Donnelly, we have to move it along. Cruz Melendez, to your point, Your Honor, if I'm going to move things along, I anticipate that there would not be need to do some leeway with respect to. Then Donnelly cuts her off and says, I don't suppose you're going to object to leading through sort of obvious things. And then Canic replies, there are certain things that I probably should be objecting to, but I'm letting it go. I'm just letting it go so we can move on. And then Donnelly, I don't want the court reporters to quit because he's freestyling a lot. He's hard to hear and he likes to add his own. Some leading, I think it's fine on this to direct him to an answer. I've been looking at his 3,500 material, so I know we can get there. All right. And then Canic, there's a hurricane coming, I'm told about, that I want to get out of here. Sidebar discussion concludes. Continued on the next page. So let's scroll down. And then they are back in open court. And it says, Mr. Smith, that's Donnelly. And then Demetrius replies, yes, ma'am. And Donnelly, I want you to listen to the question and answer the question that you're being asked as best as you can. Try not to add color to the answer. All right, just listen to Ms. Cruz Melendez's question and answer that question. Deal? Yes, Judge. And then he replies, yes, Judge. Now she said, yes, Judge, telling him how to answer. That was all he needed to answer. And then he replied, yes, Judge. And then Donnelly said, thank you so much. Go ahead. And then Cruz Melendez continues. Your Honor, I believe my last question was, were you surprised by the defendant's request to leave the location of the show to go to Chicago? And then Demetrius says, yes. And why were you surprised? It wasn't in the schedule. Now, you had mentioned that you had made travel arrangements. Who did you make travel arrangements for? Me, Robert, and Tyree Jameson went with us. Do you recall approximately what time the defendant's performance had started? Well, normally they start about 7:30, 8 o'clock. How long was the show, if you recall? To about 10:30, 11 o'clock. And after the show, you had mentioned you made travel arrangements. Did you head to the airport? Yes. How long after the show did you head to the airport? As soon as the show was over. We get in the car, we go to the airport. And you had mentioned being in the car. Who was in the car? The limo driver, me, Robert, and Tyree. And what was the defendant's demeanor during the car ride to the airport? And let me stop here. I'm thinking that Tyree is, when you're looking at the images on the video reel, the black guy, he's bald-headed, may have a mustache. I believe that is Tyree Jameson. And I believe that he is also the same guy when you see the pictures of R. Kelly walking with somebody and Geronda Pace is kind of like running up behind him. I believe that is the same guy. So then she says, and what was the defendant's demeanor during the car ride to the airport? Quiet. What, if any, conversations did you have with the defendant while on the drive? We didn't talk. He was quiet. And you arrived to the airport and got on the plane. Is that fair to say? Yes. Now, what, if anything, did the defendant say to you once you were on the plane about Aaliyah? He asked me, well, I asked him what was going on. And what did the defendant say? Well, give me a moment, just a moment. I'm just trying to think. I want to say it right. We got on the plane and then Donnelly yells into the microphone. Then Demetrius, We got on the plane. Robert again, quiet all the way to the airport until we got on the plane. I said, what's going on? He said, Aaliyah, man, she thinks she's pregnant. And that was a shock. And what was the defendant's demeanor when he was telling you that Aaliyah thought she was pregnant? Well, his demeanor was he was concerned about her. He was concerned that I didn't know what was going on, or they were like, talking all the time. So I didn't know what was really going on. His demeanor, he was worried about her. How did he appear to her during that plane ride? Worried about her. He spoke to his sister about it. She told him, and I told him, what can you say? It was him, but and that's where we left it. We didn't really talk about anything else about that until we got to Chicago, and I saw Darrell, and it was crazy. Mr. Smith, yes? Is it your testimony that you didn't have any other conversations with the defendant on the plane? Well, while on the plane, I think I told him, like I said, she thinks she's pregnant. I said, Robert, I don't remember that. Let me see what I said. Oh my God, Demetrius is a trip. So then Donnelly says, you need your recollection refreshed. And then Demetrius said, yes, can I refresh it? I don't want to say yes to anything. I'm on medications. Like I said, he told me that Darrell knew he was making arrangements for him to marry Aaliyah. And then Cruz Melendez says, and did the defendant say why he had to marry Aaliyah? And then Demetrius said, well, they told him that's what he told me, that they told him, Darrell and him, to protect himself. Now, at no point have they asked him who the hell is Darrell. Do the jury know who Darrell is? Do the defense know who Darrell is? Does Judge Donnelly know who Darrell is? Who is Darrell, y'all? So then Cruz Melendez says to protect himself from what? Well, to protect Aaliyah. That was, and then Canick objects and says, Your Honor, I'm going to object. And then Demetrius says, you're asking me stuff. And then Donnelly says, first of all, the objection is overruled. Don't have an argument with the assistant United States attorney. She's asking the question, and she's directing that to Demetrius. And then Demetrius says, I have to use the bathroom. And then Donnelly said, you need a break? Demetrius, yes, ma'am. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a 5-minute break. And can you escort the witness out, please? And then the courtroom deputy, all rise. Jury exits courtroom at 4:48 p.m. Witness leaves the witness stand. And then Donnelly, all right, we can take Mr. Kelly in the back, but I'm staying here, so don't anybody go too far. As soon as he comes back, we'll continue. The defendant enters the courtroom at 4:49 p.m. A recess in the proceedings was taken. Witness takes the witness stand. Donnelly, just before the jury comes out, Mr. Smith, yes, ma'am. This will go a lot smoother and a lot faster if you listen to the question and answer the question. I'm running a little bit out of patience here. If you can answer the question, answer the question. You running out of patience? I am. I run the show, sir. Then we can go home then, right? No, you can't. Your answer the questions that you're asked and cooperate with the prosecutor and answer the questions that she asks you. It's 5 to 5 o'clock. Let's go. Let's get the jury in. There's a brief pause in the proceedings was held. Courtroom deputy, all rise. Jury enters courtroom at 4:47 p.m. Courtroom deputy, you may be seated. Donnelly, okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're ready to continue. Go ahead, Miss Cruz Melendez. Your Honor, if I could have the last question read back, sure. Then the court deputy, the witness is reminded he is still under oath. The requested portion of the record was read back by the official court reporter. And then Cruz Melendez, Can I have the witness remove his mask? Donnelly, take your mask off, Mr. Smith. And then Cruz Melendez is continuing. Mr. Smith, when the defendant said that Darrell had said that he needed to marry Aaliyah to protect himself, protect the defendant from what? Okay, let me put a pin here. I think they're talking about Darrell McDavid, but the way they got his name spelled, it looks like Darrell. Okay, and then Darrell McDavid is the person in the mugshot looking picture that has like the reddish brown hair. Okay, so Demetrius says, I guess jail, I guess. I'm sorry, I guess jail. Then Canick, objection if he doesn't know. And then Donnelly, overruled. Did the defendant say that? Canick, objection. Demetrius, yes. Donnelly, overruled. And you mentioned Darrell. Who was Darrell? Darrell McDavid. Who is he in relation to the defendant? He was Robert's accountant as well as Robert's acting manager. What, if anything, did the defendant say to you on the plane with respect to where Aaliyah was? With respect to where Aaliyah? At the hotel. What hotel? I think it was the Sheraton in Maywood. Sheraton, or I think it was the Sheraton. In what city, though? What was that? Maywood. What state is that located in? Illinois. On that plane ride, who, if anyone else, did the defendant tell you he had spoken to about Aaliyah possibly being pregnant? He spoke to his sister. He told me that. And what did he say about that? He spoke to his sister. He spoke to his sister. And what did he tell you that he told his sister? His sister said that, well, if Aaliyah said she's pregnant, doesn't mean she's pregnant, you know. And when the defendant was telling you these things, what was his demeanor? Concerned. Is it your testimony here today that his demeanor was just concerned? Canick, objection. Donnelly, overruled. Was it anything else besides concern? Demetrius, I mean, what did I say before? Donnelly, you need to have your recollection refreshed. Yes. Cruz Melendez, may I approach, Your Honor? Yes. Approaching the witness, showing to the witness. Demetrius, yeah, he was carrying a lot. He was crying a lot. Yeah, he was crying. So did you and the defendant and Tyree ultimately land in Chicago? Yes. And what time did the plane land in Chicago approximately? I don't recall. Was it in the morning, evening, early morning? Probably, yeah, early morning. And once you landed, what happened? Where did you go after you landed? Can you ask that again? Where did you go after you landed? You, the defendant, and Tyree, where did you go? I remember correctly, we went to the hotel, to the Sheraton Hotel. I remember correctly. Okay, Mr. Smith, do you recall giving grand jury, and then he cuts her off and says, can I just read that so we don't have to keep on going through this here? And then Donnelly, does it refresh your recollection? Yes, it does. Why don't you show him? Direct him to the page. I feel like I'm on trial for Aaliyah shit. Aaliyah not even here to say where you go after that. We went home to his house. When you say home to his house, what do you mean? Don't read it. Well, Lake Point Towers, don't read it. I'm sorry, Judge. That's all right. Just answer the questions. And then Cruz Melendez. And when you say his house, whose house did you go to? Lake Point Towers, Robert's house. And when you were at the defendant's house, what, if any, conversations did you have with the defendant there about the situation with Aaliyah? I remember that, and I told Robert that this is something that just couldn't happen, that he shouldn't listen to Darrell. I told him that he couldn't marry Aaliyah, that she was too young, and you know that she couldn't go to school without a truant officer coming after her. So that's something you shouldn't do. That's what I remember about that. And what did the defendant say to you? He he was confused. He was confused, and he just asked me whose side I was on. And you said he asked which side you were on? Who you with? Me or them? That's, you know. And at some point, did you leave the defendant's apartment? Yes. After leaving the defendant's apartment, where did you go? I think to the hotel. And who went with you to the hotel? Me and Robert. I think me and Robert were together, I think. And you testified earlier that you thought it was a Sheraton. Yes. And why did you go to that Sheraton? To meet with Daryl. And was anyone else at the Sheraton? I don't remember. Donnelly, do you need to have your recollection refreshed? Yes, please. All right, you just need to ask. Yes, go ahead. And then Cruz Melendez, I think I can ask a question that might assist. Donnelly, whatever will be best. Cruz Melendez, was Aaliyah there at the hotel? Yes. And when you say that you went to the hotel, where in the hotel did you go? To the room. And do you recall what kind of room it was? It was a hotel suite. Now, once you reached the hotel, what, if any, conversation did you have with the defendant about his plan to marry Aaliyah? Canick, objection. Donnelly, overruled. Canick, it's not the testimony. Donnelly, overruled. You got to use the microphone. I can barely hear you. Thanks. Demetrius, I was always an objection to what Robert was being told to do. What, if any, next steps did you discuss? They wanted to figure out how to make that happen, make the marriage happen. And I felt I was going to get ready to get pushed out the loop in respect to, and I wanted to keep a hold of Robert. So I suggested that I could get identification. I wanted to stay in the loop. I wanted to stay. I wanted to just do things to make it happen, but not happen. Okay. I said that I could get the ID. I know somebody who could get her an ID or something like that, and that's what I did. IDs for what? IDs to prove her age. And why did you need an ID for Aaliyah? Aaliyah was underage. And when you say underage, under 18? Yes. Okay, did you discuss at all what kinds of identification you needed to get for Aaliyah? I felt that when you go to get a marriage license, you would need to have proper identification, state ID, and only state ID I knew was to get a welfare ID. And so, did you discuss any other types of identification that Aaliyah might need? She needed more than one piece of ID. How did you know she needed more than one piece of identification? I figured you need that to do anything, to get a license, to get a marriage license, to get on an airplane, or you need more than a piece of ID, and that ID was not official identification. It was just an ID for that office. I suppose that there. So, word there, did you have any other discussions about the other types of identification? Yes, there was a FedEx worker ID, a school ID. Those were the 3 pieces of ID. So, going back to the identification that you mentioned from the welfare office, what, if any, discussion did you have with the defendant about how you could obtain the welfare office identification? Well, I actually didn't have any discussion with Robert. It was with Daryl. What did you discuss with Daryl? I said, I could probably get that. I could probably go in there and talk her into it. Everybody needs some money. Now, I'm sorry. Can you say that again? Can you read back to me his answer? The requested portion of the record was read back by the official court reporter. And what did you mean everybody needs some money? I felt like I could offer somebody some money to give me an ID. Who would you be offering money to get? Whoever would open up to it, to be receptive to it. Who would you be offering money to get the identification from? Well, I went to the welfare office and I went in and I want to make some money. And before we get there, though, did you have a discussion about how much money you would need? I told Dara, give me about $500. Oh my God. So then Cruz Melendez. Now, did you have any discussion with the defendant about the amount of money you would need in order to get his identification from the welfare office? Canick, objection. Donnelly, overruled. Did I have a discussion with Robert about recall? Do you not recall? Well, you got it. Write it down. Write it down. I said it before. I don't want to say what I said because I don't remember discussing money with Robert about anything in that respect. I don't remember that. Again, I might have mentioned it, but my communication was with Daryl. You might have mentioned it to whom? I might have mentioned it to Robert. So you testified that at some point you did, in fact, go to a welfare office to get an identification card. Is that correct? Yes, I did. Okay, who went with you? Aaliyah and I think. I don't remember who I was with. How did you get there? Drove. And was Aaliyah in the car with you? I don't remember. Donnelly. But she went to the same place. Demetrius. If she wasn't in the car with me, then she was in the car behind me. Donnelly. All right, next question. And who, if anyone, was in the car with Aaliyah? If Aaliyah was in the car, she probably was in the car with Robert. Canick, objection. Donnelly, overruled. Do you remember? Is there anything that will refresh his recollection? Cruz Melendez, yes, Judge. I'm going to show him his grand jury testimony, which is 3,500. I'm sorry, Your Honor. It's 3,500 DS 14. Okay. Cruz Melendez, just for the record, Your Honor, when I have been refreshing Mr. Smith's recollection, it's been 3,500 DS 14. Got it. Great. Then Demetrius. Let me see. I mean, like I said, if she wasn't with me, she was in the car behind me, as that says. Okay, my question was whether or not the defendant was with Aaliyah in the car behind you. Yes. Now, you testified that you thought you could get an ID from a welfare office. Had you ever had public benefits from the welfare office before? Yes. So, had you ever been to the welfare office that you went to? Yes. Do you recall where it was that you went to, which welfare office you went to? 22nd Street and State. 22nd and State. I think it was 21st. What happened once you got to the welfare office? I went inside, felt my way around, and I approached the person, and she agreed, and she made an ID. Aaliyah came in, she took the ID. Now, when you say you approached the person, who did you approach? I don't know her. Okay, do you recall? You said it was a her. It was a woman. And what was the woman's race? She was African American. And what, if any, what was her position at the welfare office? Taking photos. And what, if anything, did you say to the woman who took photos at the welfare office? I don't remember word for word, but I made her an offer and she took the money. How much money did you give her? I gave her $500. Where had you gotten that money from? Daryl. And how did he give the money to you? Cash. Now, you had earnings in that the woman at the welfare office took photos there. That didn't make sense. So it says now you had earnings. I think what they are saying is now you learned that the woman at the welfare office took photos there. Did she work at the welfare office? Yes, I would assume. Canick, objection to the assumption. Donnelly, overruled. And then Demetrius, I went in there, she took a photo. Apparently she had to work there. I don't think she would have been able to do that. You didn't know her specifically? I don't know her personally, specifically. I never seen her. Donnelly, it appeared to you that she worked there, right? Yes. That's why you gave her the money. Yes, yes. All right, next question. And then Cruz Melendez picks back up. So after you gave her the money, what did you do? Aaliyah came in. She went and took the ID and we left. And it was just that fast. What kind of identification was it? It was a public aid ID. It wasn't a state. It wasn't an official identification or anything. It was just a picture with an ID with a picture on it. It didn't have her age or anything. So did the woman who you gave the money to, the woman who worked at the welfare office, did she take Aaliyah's photo? Yes. Once you obtained the photo and the identification was given to Aaliyah, what happened next? Oh, actually, I'm sorry, just to back up for a moment. You had previously testified that you had gone to a welfare office before. Yes. Now, in applying for public assistance, did you have to fill out any paperwork? Yes. And did you have to provide any documentation when you applied for it? Yes. For welfare services? Yes. And generally speaking, what types of documents did you have to provide? State ID, birth certificate, social security card? Did you provide your name when you were seeking benefits? State ID, social security card, birth certificate? Okay, and at the time that you took Aaliyah to the welfare office, did she fill out any paperwork? No. Now, when you and Aaliyah went into the welfare office, did the defendant come inside? No. Where was he? In the car. So what happened after you left the welfare office with the ID that you had obtained for Aaliyah? Went back to the hotel, or let me see. She needed to get another ID, so we went somewhere else. I think like a FedEx, something like that. And who got another work ID? He cut her off when she was asking the question. You believe it was a FedEx. Who went there? Me, Robert, Leah, and Tyree, I guess. Why did you go to the FedEx that you went to? To get work ID. But why specifically a FedEx? Somebody knew somebody there. Who do you recall knowing someone there? I don't know. I didn't know that person. I didn't know the guy that said he knew somebody. I went with him and I didn't know who he was. I forgot his name. He was with us. So you don't recall his name at the moment. I don't remember his name at all, no. Is there something that would refresh your recollection? What's his name? And then Donnelly interjects, well, she'll show you the transcript. Cruz Menendez. I'm showing the witness again, 3500 DS 14. Mr. Williams? Does that refresh your recollection? Mr. Williams. I remember Williams, but I don't remember his name. I don't remember it. I remember the Williams, though. And do you recall anything about Williams in terms of, do you recall any information about Williams? No, he was one of Robert's friends. And what, if anything, did Williams do for a living? Real estate or something like that, if I remember correctly. And so, when you arrived at the shipping place or the FedEx place, who did you go inside? Yes. Who went inside? Me and Aaliyah and Williams. And what happened once you went inside? She took a work ID. What do you mean she took a work ID? She took a picture. When you say a work ID, work from where? The company, the FedEx office, wherever we went. I don't remember if it was FedEx or not, because I don't know if FedEx existed there. Oh my God. What type of company was it? It was a courier company. Donnelly, is it correct when you say that she got an ID like a work ID? Donnelly, as though she worked there? Yes. All right, next question. Then Cruz Melendez continues. So what happened after Aaliyah obtained the ID from the courier location? We went back to the hotel. And what happened after you went to the hotel? We went to get the marriage license. And who went to get the marriage license? Darren McDavid, me, Robert, and Aaliyah. Do you recall where you went to get the marriage license? City Hall in Maywood. How did you get there? Drive. So, who went to the city hall? Me, Daryl McDavid, Robert, and Aaliyah. Was anyone else there? No. Was Tyree there? Well, maybe Tyree possibly was there. Yes, I mean, what happened once you got into the city hall? They applied for their marriage license. Now, let me stick a pin in here. Now, Aaliyah was supposed to have been how old at this time? Where was Aaliyah's parents? Where was Aaliyah's family? Because didn't he say that they flew late at night after a concert in Orlando to Chicago? Okay, so that took a couple of hours. I've flown from I've flown from Tampa to Chicago before. It takes a few hours. So that means that they would have gotten there like either very early in the morning or in the middle of the night. I am going to go with very early in the morning because unless it was a red eye, wasn't no flights leaving at, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. So they probably left at about 4 or 5 in the morning, got there at about 8. And Aaliyah was already there. So where was Aaliyah's parents? Where did they think Aaliyah was that time of morning? How did Aaliyah get from Detroit to Chicago to this hotel? And where were her parents as they're doing all this running around to the welfare office, to the FedEx that won the FedEx? Where were her parents? Where did they think Aaliyah was? Whose care and custody was Aaliyah in? Aaliyah wasn't old enough to be driving no car by herself. She probably didn't even own a car. So how did Aaliyah get from Detroit to Chicago, and in whose care was Aaliyah? So let's keep reading, because it seems like whenever I start answering these questions, I read down a little bit more and my questions are answered. So Demetrius said Robert and Aaliyah, and then Cruz Melendez says, from what you observed when Aaliyah and the defendant went into the Maywood City Hall, did anyone review Aaliyah's ID? Yes. What, if anything, happened when? Was it an employee at the City Hall? Yes. Okay, what, if anything, happened when the employee at the City Hall reviewed Aaliyah's ID? She let them sign the marriage license. Okay, let's stick a pin here. Demetrius is saying that it was a lady, but when the Catherine Harris lady testified, she referred to a male was the clerk that was handling the thing. I could be wrong. Tell me if you heard it differently, but I thought she said that the clerk was a male. So in any event, he said she let them sign the marriage license. Did she let them sign the marriage license right away? She reviewed the ID and she gave the marriage license. Do you recall giving testimony in the grand jury? Yes. Do you recall taking an oath to tell the truth? Canick, objection. Donnelly, overruled. Demetrius, you keep on threatening me. I'm ready to go home. Donnelly, well, we're not going home yet. Do you want to show him something and see if it refreshes his recollection? Let's do that, okay? Cruz Melendez, absolutely. Demetrius, Donnelly, we are almost. Demetrius, yes, ma'am. Donnelly, thank you so much. All right, Demetrius. And the lady was a little hesitant. Cruz Melendez, read it to yourself. Demetrius, let me just read it because you keep asking me stuff over and over. I'm getting older and I can't be just remembering everything. I'm sorry, y'all. But I know y'all laughing too. So anyway. Donnelly, well, look at it and see if it refreshes recollection. Does that refresh your recollection? Demetrius, I'm uncomfortable with this, Your Honor. I'm truly uncomfortable. You're continuously talking about Aaliyah. Her parents are not here, and I don't understand why I got to do that. Donnelly, well, we can have a conversation about that another time. Let's try to move this along. The question is, does that refresh your recollection about? And then Demetrius cuts her off and says, yes, it does. Donnelly, what happened? Demetrius, yes. Donnelly, and what happened? Demetrius, okay, yes, because the IDs didn't have her age on it, yes. Then Cruz Melendez, so what? And then Demetrius cut her off and said, I don't know what Daryl did. I don't know, you know. And then Donnelly interjects, but you said Daryl talked. Is that what you said, Daryl? Demetrius, yes, Daryl talked to somebody in there. I don't know what he did. All right, and then what happened next? Then they signed the marriage license. All right, next question. Then they went and got married. And then Cruz Melendez jumps back in. And did they obtain a marriage license? Yes. And what, if anything, happened with the marriage license? Took it to a preacher, right? So where did you all go after and then Demetrius cuts her off and says, back to the hotel. The same hotel? Yes. And what happened once you got back to the hotel? Well, they had arranged for a minister and a ceremony took place. Was there a minister there? Yes. And do you recall the name of the minister? No, I don't. No, I do not. You can show it to me. I remember his name. I don't know his name. I mean, I didn't remember his name because it wasn't important to me. Donnelly, but he was a preacher, right? Yes, ma'am. Next question. Cruz Melendez. Your Honor, I would like to refresh the witness recollection. And then Demetrius said, what's his name? And then Cruz Melendez said, can you read that and see if it refreshes your recollection? And then Demetrius said, Edmund, I think something like that. Yes. Okay, one moment, Your Honor. Sure. Actually, this is a good time to break. It is almost 5:30, and I know some of the jurors have to get home. Cruz Melendez. Okay, Your Honor, if I could. Donnelly, do you want to finish up whatever you want to do? 2 minutes. Then Cruz Melendez, I want him to repeat his last answer. Donnelly, okay. Cruz Melendez, what was the name? It was Edmund, and think Edmund something. What's the name of the officiant who was at the hotel? Yes. I'm fine with ending there. Donnelly, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to break for the weekend. Please do not talk about the case. Don't look anything up. Don't read any articles about it. Don't watch any news or anything like that. I thank you for your patience this week. I will see you Monday morning. We will begin at 9:30. And again, don't look anything up. Don't talk to anybody about the case. Don't read anything. Have a great weekend. And then the courtroom deputy, all rise. The jury exits the courtroom. The court, okay. I'm sorry, Donnelly. Okay, you can take the witness out. And then Cruz Melendez, Your Honor, just one moment. If you could instruct the witness, he does need to return. Donnelly, you need to be here on Monday morning. And what time do you want him here? We are starting at 9:30. So I will see you both then. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend. And then Cruz Melendez, thank you. And then Demetrius, tell the judge to do things. Donnelly, see you later. Have a good weekend. And then the witness exits the courtroom. Donnelly, let's talk about schedule. I assume there will come a time when we finish this witness, and then if that happy day arrives, then I take it you will have some more witnesses on Monday. Are there any more witnesses of a category? I assume this person is his own unique fellow, but are there any other people that fall into this same category? Elizabeth Geddes, it is within the realm of possibility. Donnelly, I see. Okay, well, you will let me know. I'm not going to ask you how much time you expect to spend with this gentleman, but I'm sure it will be productive. Canick, I hope. Donnelly, I take it you don't really have a whole lot more left. Cruz Melendez, I don't know. Canick, Your Honor, could I get an understanding as to court's ruling as to overruling my objection? The government was impeaching its witness by Donnelly. I didn't let her do it. Canick, okay. Donnelly, so it never happened. Canick, all right, okay. Donnelly, I think we suggested that she refresh his recollection instead. Canick, yeah. Donnelly, because he said he was getting older, as we all are. All right, anything else before we stop? All right, everybody have a good weekend. Matter adjourned to August 23rd, 2021 at 9:30 a.m. And then the rest of the pages are just an index of what the different pages are so far in the description and where you can find the exhibits. And then they have like a log, which I thought was interesting, that shows the number of times, well, not the number of times, but where certain words and references are used within the document. And like basically they use the word Africa, and you can find that. And it says at 599 2. I don't know if that's a time, or maybe they're adding all the pages together from the first day of testimony to this day. But they have these references, like age was used multiple times, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Maybe they're doing a clock at what minute. Maybe it's what minute it looks like time that they're saying that you can find these different words. And so look like the word that was used the most here, because it took up a whole nother column, and it was Aaliyah. So Aaliyah was used a whole lot of times so far in testimony. So I just thought that that was very interesting. I mean, I don't know how court reporters work. You know, how they using a machine that does like shorthand like they used to do a long time ago, or is this new machinery that they're using? But it impressed and intrigued me as to how that worked. And so anyway, I am going to stop here. You know what, I changed my mind. I am going to go ahead and read Monday's information because it wasn't that much. It wasn't that many pages. And then I remembered that the first 8 or 9 pages were redacted from the document. So I don't know what they said. It was just blank lines because they had a meeting prior to court starting. And so it picks up where they're in open court. And Donnelly says, all right, are we ready for the witness? Let's do it. And then Cruz Melendez, yes, Judge, we are. Then the witness resumes the stand. Donnelly, all right, Mr. Smith is here. Let's get the jury if we could. The jury enters. Donnelly, all right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you all enjoyed your weekend. We're ready to continue with the direct examination of Mr. Smith. Go ahead, Miss Cruz Melendez. And then the clerk says the witness is reminded he is still under oath. And then Demetrius agrees and says yes. And then the witness, Demetrius Smith, previously sworn, resumed. And then we go down and the direct examination continues. And Cruz Melendez, good morning, Mr. Smith. Good morning. Is your microphone on? Donnelly, maybe Miss Green can take a look at it. And then they have a pause. And then Donnelly says, all right, I think the microphone works. And then Cruz Melendez says, Mr. Smith, when we broke on Friday, you were explaining that once you arrived at the hotel with Aaliyah, the defendant and others, there was an officiant or a preacher there. Do you recall that testimony? Yes, ma'am. I want to get there, but I want to back up for a moment, okay? Okay. Do you recall testifying that after leaving the defendant's apartment when you went to Chicago, you went to the Sheraton Hotel? I think so, yes. Sitting here today, do you recall everyone who was at the Sheraton when you arrived? Do I recall everyone? Yes. I know it was me. I know it was Robert. I know it was Aaliyah. I know it was Tyree, the preacher. I'm talking about when you first arrived after leaving and flying to Chicago, so before the marriage license. Before the marriage license? Yes. Who was in the hotel? Darren McDavid, Aaliyah, that was it. Was Robert there? Yes. The defendant. Robert was with me. Now, you also previously testified with respect to your suggesting to the group that you could get an ID from the welfare office if you paid some cash. Do you recall testifying to that? Yes, ma'am. Do you recall here today, as you sit here, who was there for that conversation? Darren McDavid, myself. I think Robert was with us. I'm not sure if Robert was there, but do you need your memory refreshed? Not really, no. Maybe he was there. If I said, maybe he was there. I don't remember precisely each time, but I'm pretty sure he was there. Is your testimony here today that you're not sure whether or not the defendant was there for that conversation? Canic, objection. Donnelly, overruled. The conversation of the money, I'm not sure if Robert was there. I'd like to show the witness 3500 DS 14 to refresh his recollection. Canic, Your Honor, objection. Donnelly, overruled. And then there's a pause, and then Demetrius continues. I did say yes, but as I sit and remember, I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure he was there with me, so I guess I could say yes. So your answer is yes? Yes. The defendant was there. Canic, objection. Donnelly, sustained as to that. Cruz Melendez, Your Honor, may we have a brief sidebar? Donnelly, no, let's keep going. Okay, do you remember what, if anything, the defendant said in response to your suggestion to obtain an ID for $500 or so? I don't remember Robert saying anything about that. When it comes to Robert and Aaliyah, that was something that was happening. Objection as non-responsive, and that's Cruz Melendez. Donnelly, well, there's no question to you right now. Wait until Ms. Cruz Melendez puts a question to you. Go ahead. Your Honor, the witness has testified that he doesn't recall what the defendant said. I'd like to refresh his recollection with 3500 DS 13. Donnelly, all right, go ahead. And then there's a pause, and then Melendez Cruz asks him, what, if anything, did the defendant say? I don't see anywhere it said Robert said anything. Donnelly, the question is, having looked at that, does that refresh your recollection as to what, if anything, Mr. Kelly said at the time Ms. Cruz Melendez is talking about? Yes, I don't remember Robert. If I said that, I don't remember Robert telling me that. Donnelly, all right. I don't remember that. I just don't remember. I don't even remember if I told you that. It might have been written down incorrectly to me because I don't remember Robert having anything to say about the $500. Donnelly, all right, next. I talked to Darren McDavid about the money. Wait until there's a question, all right? Next question. So, going back to the hotel room after obtaining the marriage license, what happened once you all arrived there? Well, it was supposed to be set up, a ceremony set up with the preacher and then he's cut off by Judge Donnelly, who tells him once again to keep his voice up. So then he completes his answer and says, with the preacher, and that was pretty much it. The purpose of going back was to get them married. And then Melendez Cruz starts questioning again, and she says, and did a marriage ceremony occur? Yes, it did. And did the defendant and Aaliyah exchange vows? Yes, they did. How was the defendant dressed for the ceremony? I don't remember. And what about Aaliyah? I don't remember. I don't remember. Donnelly, do you remember whether they dressed up like wedding clothes? Demetrius, no. What kind of clothes were they? Just casual clothes. Casual clothing? Everyday clothing. Next question. And so back to Melendez, and that was an exchange between Demetrius and Donnelly. Did the defendant and Aaliyah exchange rings? I don't remember. So what happened after the ceremony? We went back to the concert. And how soon after the ceremony did you leave for the concert? Maybe about an hour or so. We spent about an hour or so prior to leaving the hotel to go back to the concert. Did the defendant spend any time alone with Aaliyah? A few minutes, yes, not that much time. Now, while you were at the hotel before leaving for the concert, did you have any interactions with Aaliyah? No. When you say you went back to the concert, who were you saying went back to the concert? Me, Robert, and Tyree. And did Aaliyah go with you? No. So what happened after you landed back to where the concert was? Okay, let me stick a pin here. So was Aaliyah with Daryl McDavid? Was he transporting Aaliyah around? And why would Daryl McDavid have been transporting Aaliyah around? Did they just leave Aaliyah in the hotel room and for her to get home however she could? Where was Barry Hankerson as all this was going on? Was Aaliyah in communication with her parents? I need somebody to help me understand how a 15-year-old was in the company of all these men. Please help me understand. And that is the jury sitting in there asking these same questions that I am asking. I need some understanding. So back to Demetrius. We went back to, he pauses, we went to the show. So did the defendant have a performance that evening? Yes. And did he in fact perform? Yes. What, if anything, happened after the performance? We prepared for the next show. Immediately after the performance, what happened? And then also notice that they're not giving the dates, but the way that this is reading is that R. Kelly flew back to Chicago in the early morning hours of August 30th, I'm assuming. And the marriage took place because they couldn't get married until the 31st. It had to be the next day. So this marriage took place. And then he immediately flew back to Orlando or wherever his next concert was. How did the marriage license or the certification, I guess they mailed the certification because in the earlier testimony, it said that the certification was received on September 4th, and then it was certified, or the certificate was mailed or picked up on the 6th. Oh my God, this is so confusing. So who picked up the certification? Who got the certification? Who sent the certification in? And then I remember her asking the question about, could anybody go and pick up a certification? So it sounds like somebody else dropped the certification off, or maybe they mailed the certification and then somebody went and picked it up 2 days later. That's what it sounds like to me. Tell me if that's what it sounds like to you. But in any event, we have them leaving. Demetrius, R. Kelly, and Tyree. We have them leaving, which means that Aaliyah was still at the hotel, and the only other person that was there was the Daryl McDavid guy, right? And to my understanding, Daryl McDavid did not work for Aaliyah or work for Aaliyah's family. So why would they have left Aaliyah with him? Okay, so help me understand that. So back to the testimony. So the question, what, if anything, happened after the performance? We prepared for the next show. Immediately after the performance, what happened? Well, before each performance, there's a meet and greet. And was there a meet and greet? Yes. And did the defendant go to the meet and greet? Yes. And were there female guests at the meet and greet? Yes. And did the defendant interact with those female guests? Yes, it's a meet and greet. One moment, Your Honor. Sure. Then there's a pause, and then Cruz Melendez. Nothing further, Your Honor. And then Donnelly, all right, cross-examination. Canick, yes. Donnelly, Mr. Smith, defense counsel is going to ask you some questions. Just do your best to answer the question that he's asking you. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Okay, so now we're on cross-examination, and Mr. Canick is doing the cross, and he says, good morning, sir. Good morning. Now, I think you testified, you told us last week that at some point that Robert told you that Aaliyah might be pregnant. Robert said, if I remember, my question is, did you tell us that last week that there came a time where Robert told you that Aaliyah might be pregnant? Thought she was pregnant, yes. And you told us that you assumed that the baby was Robert's. Do you recall telling us that last week? I don't remember saying anything like that. You didn't? You never saw a baby? Am I correct? No, it's the assumption of Aaliyah being pregnant. To my knowledge, Aaliyah was never pregnant. Thank you. Now, you at some point pled guilty to bribery. No, okay. And you wrote a book? Yes. And in that book, you embellished a bit to make the book a little juicy. Am I correct? I wrote it to the best of my ability to how I thought. I was sitting inside a cell. I was locked up in prison. And you wanted sales. Is that correct? I beg your pardon. You wanted the book to sell. Is that correct? When I started writing the book, it wasn't about selling. It was about releasing things inside me. Donnelly, when did you write the book? Demetrius, I wrote the book in 2000. I released it in 2011. Once I got out of prison, I got out in 2010. In May, after that, I began to find people to help me develop it. It was just a manuscript, and there was a lot of thoughts that I had inside of myself regarding my relationship, my life. It's about my life. Donnelly, right. Sorry, Mr. Canick, go ahead. So Canick resumes questioning. And you told the government that everything in the book, the things that were in the book, a couple of the things weren't true. Am I correct? I never told anybody that. You never told anyone that? No, the things in the book is the truth to my knowledge, to the best of my knowledge. Okay, now Robert never had anything to do with you bribing anyone to get a marriage license. Am I correct? No, he didn't. Now, I want to go back a little bit. You mentioned that Aaliyah and her mother would come to the studio so Robert could work with Aaliyah. Yes, and Robert had a friendly relationship with Aaliyah's mother. Am I correct? Robert was close with the whole family. Okay, and he spent a lot of time with Aaliyah's mother. Am I correct? Just his mother? No, when they were there, they were together, Aaliyah and her mother. Aaliyah and her mother. Yes, with Robert and his nephew, her uncle. And Barry Hankerson was Aaliyah's uncle. Yes, and there came a point in time when Robert fired Barry. Yes, and that was after Robert fired Barry after he and Aaliyah got married. Am I correct? Yes. Now, I want to go back a little bit. You told us about your meeting Robert and the relationship that you had with him. How old was Robert when you met him initially? Robert was, I think, 16 or 17, 16 at the time. He had just made 17 in January. I met Robert like in October of that year, and then he turned 17 that January. And then Canick resumes. And how old were you, sir? I was 24, I think, 24, something like that. And you were a singer at that point in time. Yes. Is that correct? Yes. And you were trying to get into the industry as well. Yes. And when you met Robert, you heard him singing. Yes. And you were impressed with his talent. Am I correct? Yes. Cruz Melendez. Objection. Donnelly. Overruled. Canick. I'm sorry. You said yes? Yes. And you were even more impressed with his writing skills as an artist. Am I correct? Correct. And eventually, Robert signed a contract with Jive Records. Eventually, yes. And Jive Records started promoting Robert. Am I correct? Correct. And the image that Jive Records promoted was that Robert was a sex symbol. Am I correct? Yes. In fact, didn't they dress him up and open his chest and let his chest be shown? Did they do that? Well, they had someone who was connected with him to make him up in a certain way. Am I correct? And to dress him in a certain way. Cruz Melendez. Objection. Donnelly. Sustained as to relevance. Canick. Your Honor, I think the government went into this. Donnelly. How he dressed at his concerts? Canick. No, but they went into him and the record label and promotion. Donnelly. This is not relevant. Let's move on to something that's relevant. Canic. The record company promoted Robert. Yes. And they sent him on the road. Yes. And when you're promoting someone, you want to promote a particular image. Am I correct? Yes. Now, when you initially met Robert, he was singing on the streets. I didn't see him. I met Robert at Kenwood Academy. He was singing in a talent show. Right, but there came a time that you and he were together and you would go on the subways and you'd sing. Am I correct? Yes. And you would help him in terms of the structure and making sure that he had monies, and you moved him from place to place. Am I correct? Yes. And you got a percentage of that. Am I correct? I can say yes. And Robert would give you a percentage and he would take the rest to his mom, right? Correct. You knew his family, right? Yes. You knew that his mother was a single parent. Yes. And you knew that he was taking care of the rent with that singing. Am I correct? Yes, he helped his mother. Yes. Now, Robert also played semi-pro basketball. Am I correct? I'm not aware of that. I think, yes, he played basketball. Semi-pro was after me. I noticed he played ball with someone, and that was after I left. After you left? Okay. Now, and the times that you were with Robert, what were the songs that he had written? Donnelly, sustained. Canic, can I have a second, please, Your Honor? Donnelly, sure. So there's a pause. Canic, Your Honor, may we have a sidebar? Donnelly, a brief one. Canic, very brief. So the following occurred at sidebar. Canic, Your Honor, the government asked him about the songs that he wrote. Donnelly, about songs that he wrote, I don't remember. Canic, it's there. Donnelly, I want this witness off the stand. I want irrelevant things. It's just gone on too long. Do you care if he asks about the songs? Go ahead. Fine. Canic, okay. The sidebar ends. Continued on the next page. Okay, so Canic continues to question, and he says, Robert wrote a number of hit songs. Am I correct? Yes, he did. And he produced a number of hit songs. Am I correct? That's correct. And you wrote for a number of A-rated entertainers. Am I correct? Correct. And I think he meant to say, and he wrote for a number of A-rated entertainers. They have you wrote in here. In the event, Canic goes on to say, and produced them as well. Am I correct? Correct. Thank you. Canic, nothing further, Your Honor. Then Donnelly, all right, any redirect. And then Cruz Melendez, briefly, Your Honor. Okay. And then we have the redirect examination of Cruz Melendez. Question, Mr. Smith, but for the defendant telling you that Aaliyah was pregnant, would you have arranged tickets to go to Chicago to the Sheraton Hotel? Canic, objection. Donnelly, overruled. Will you repeat that, please? I'm sorry, in my Demetrius voice. Will you repeat that, please? If the defendant hadn't asked you to arrange tickets to go to Chicago because he thought that Aaliyah was pregnant, would you have arranged tickets to go to Chicago on that date? That wasn't in the schedule. Right. If the defendant hadn't asked you to bring him to that Sheraton Hotel, would you all have been gathered in that Sheraton Hotel? No. When you discussed with the group about getting an ID from the welfare office from an employee there for $500, you talked about that with the group. And isn't it true that the defendant was there? Correct. Canic, objection. Donnelly, overruled. Can you repeat that again? When you spoke to the group, as you testified on direct examination, when you spoke to the group about acquiring a state ID from the welfare office for Aaliyah for money, the defendant was there, right? I'm pretty sure. I think so, but I'm not. I'm just not positive. Even if I said it before, I'm just not positive. I just don't see that in my head right now. Is it your testimony here today? And then he cuts her off. I'm saying it is my testimony. And then she finishes the question that the defendant may not have been there. Well, when I went and talked about money, I went and talked to Daryl, and I went and talked to Daryl about this not happening, and that's what I went to do. Mr. Smith, my question to you, and then he cuts her off. And then he says, I don't remember if Robert was there. If I said he was before, I'm not changing that story to change the story. I'm just going back, and I'm just trying. I don't see it in my mind, in my head, Robert next to me. It was so confusing to me at this time when this thing happened, because it was like an overnight thing. It was nothing we saw coming or that. You know, when it happened, it was like, wow, it was like they wanted to do something and I was against it. But, you know, at the same time, I wanted to make it happen. That shouldn't have happened. That was wrong. And that's the bottom line of that. Canic, Your Honor. And then Demetrius cuts Canic off and says, Aaliyah should be left alone. I shouldn't be talking about Aaliyah. Canic, Your Honor, Your Honor. And then Donnelly says, Mr. Smith, please don't freestyle, okay? Let the prosecutor ask you any more questions that she might have. And then Cruz Melendez says, Mr. Smith, you said that you thought that getting the ID so that Aaliyah could be married to the defendant was wrong, correct? Yes. Why did you help the defendant? I've been with Robert since 84. It's just like my brother. If something happened to my brother, you know, if he had done something wrong, I'm biding the time. I don't think that would happen. There were no, and then Canic says, Your Honor, I'm going to object to this. And then Donnelly, I think the witness has answered this question. Any more questions? And then Cruz Melendez, Mr. Smith, it's fair to say that you want to protect the defendant, correct? Canic, objection. Donnelly, overruled. Demetrius, no, it's not. No, it's not. Not at this point. No, I mean, Robert. Donnelly, okay. Canic, objection. Donnelly, that's the answer. And then Demetrius, no, I'm not making. Donnelly, any more questions? Cruz Melendez, nothing further, Your Honor. Donnelly, any recross? Canic, one question. Then we have the recross examination by Mr. Canic, and his question is, Mr. Smith, you were asked by the government that had Robert not told you what he did about Aaliyah possibly being pregnant, that you would not have purchased tickets. Do you remember the government asked you that a short while ago? Well, according to your testimony on Friday, Robert didn't tell you about Aaliyah possibly being pregnant until you guys were on the train. Yes. On the plane, right? Yes. Canic, thank you. Donnelly, that was two questions. Canic, sorry. Donnelly, do you have anything else? Cruz Melendez, one question. Redirect examination by Cruz Melendez. Did the defendant tell you that he was in trouble and asked you to arrange those tickets? Is that correct? No, it's not. He said Aaliyah was in trouble and asked you, No, it's not. He said Aaliyah is in trouble. And then Cruz Melendez, right, sorry. That Aaliyah was in trouble and asked you to arrange those tickets, correct? He said we got to get home. Donnelly, okay. Cruz Melendez, nothing else. Donnelly, thank you so much. You can step down. The witness is excused. And then Donnelly, are you ready to call your next witness? Geddes, we are not, Your Honor, but we are working feverishly on it. And then Donnelly, okay, so maybe we'll take an unexpected break. All right, so we're going to break for 15 minutes or so. Please don't talk about the case, and we'll see you back in 15 minutes. The jury exits. Donnelly, okay, everybody can sit down. I said 15 minutes. Am I going to be a liar? Geddes, I hope not, Judge. Donnelly, okay, Geddes. The cross was much shorter than we anticipated, but we're working on getting her here. Donnelly, okay, so we'll be in recess. I take it you expect the next witness to take most of the day. Geddes, yes, Your Honor. Donnelly, okay, all right. So we'll be back at 10:30. Geddes, thank you. Donnelly, great. Recess taken, continued on next page. And then I think when they come back, that is when Azriel, and I can't remember if I read this to you guys. There was something going on in the courtroom where Mr. Scholar left, and then they were waiting for him to come back. And see, Donnelly said, well, I don't need detail. I just didn't realize he wasn't here. Well, it happens every once in a while with lots of lawyers, so I think it's okay. And then they have a pause in the proceedings. Then the jury comes back in. And I want to say that Azriel was then Azriel was the next witness. And then you guys have already gotten that testimony. I posted that. And if you haven't watched it, just go back. Remember, I'm not putting Mr. Kelly's name in the title or in the description or adding these videos to the series, the playlist that I created, because it gets flagged by YouTube. So just look for the images, okay? Go to my community page, click on videos, and then the videos will appear. You might have to scroll down to current videos, but you'll see all the videos that I have done. And at one point, they'll come in chronological order, and then you can see the other videos that I have done on this case and the ones that I have done in the last few days, because I have done several, trying to get caught up on these transcripts and getting you all up to date. And so the next video I'll do, and it'll probably be tomorrow, will be Geronda Pace's testimony. And then after Geronda finished, there was the Anthony Navarro, who was an employee of R. Kelly's. He will follow Geronda Pace, and then we will be all caught up. So that's it for me. Go ahead, leave your comments below, rate the video, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And until the next time, I shall talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.